How about that? Okay. Alrighty. You can all see my screen? Okay. So yeah, before we get going, I've muted you all just as John did when he was leading the previous session on Zoom. This helps manage chaos if we all try to talk over each other. And it also reduces background noise because, who knows what's going to happen behind us. So if you have questions, if I say something and you want to follow up or ask for clarification or something, type your questions into a chat. I think just seeing the pictures of who's here, all of you have been on Zoom before, but if you haven't, the chat down at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat little button. You click on that, and then you can type your question into the chat. And what I'll do is I will pause periodically throughout this presentation to read and answer questions, and Anne is also going to be monitoring the chats, and she'll jump in if I haven't responded to something. If your question is complicated, which definitely can happen, just indicate in the chat that you'd like me to call on you, and then when we get to the question period, when we get to the break, I will ask you to unmute yourself, and then you can speak, and then I'll respond. Okay, so this is the using Moodle forums information session. And one thing that I wanted to note up front, and then I'll say this again at the very end, the real guru of the technical side of Moodle, of all things Moodle, is Brian Blackwell, definitely not me. He knows more about the technical aspects of Moodle forums. What I think I can help a lot of us with is the pedagogical usages of Moodle, of the forums, excuse me. I use them in almost all of my classes. I've been using them for a number of years, and just through trial and error, I found some really some things that are really, really useful for my classes, and I want to share those with you. Now, this is a slide that I swiped from John Lefebvre's presentation, but you can see that I've highlighted that part there, which because I highlighted, I'm claiming it as my own now. So what John told us is that there's, when we talk about distance learning, there's basically three types: e-learning, which I know nothing about, and then what we're going to talk about today is asynchronous instruction, like recorded lectures. I do that in some of my classes too, but particularly today we're going to talk about forums that we can use in Moodle. The other type is synchronous instruction. This is real-time instruction. This is what we're doing right now, where we're having a meeting together. Synchronous can also be a chat function. We're going to be using that today, but there are also other kinds of synchronous instruction. So what we're going to cover, we're going to start with what a Moodle forum is. I'm going to assume that if you're with us now, that maybe you've never used a Moodle forum before, or maybe you've used it a little bit. So we're going to start from an assumption that most of us don't really know anything about a Moodle forum. So we'll talk about what a Moodle forum is and why we might use it. And then I will jump to specific examples from my classes. I'll let you see how I have used them in my classes. I'll show you different types of forums. And then after we've done that, I will walk you through how to set up a basic forum. It's super easy. I have some advice that I can give you from my years of using them, and I will show you some further helps. We can talk about some more advanced things if we want to, but I don't know that we necessarily have to. So first question, what is a Moodle forum? A Moodle forum is an online text-based conversation that unfolds over an extended period of time. And most of us already use forums, different kinds of forums, especially if you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So, on Facebook, if you post something and then people reply to your post and then people reply to the replies, that's a forum. And it can unfold over however long you have your post up there. There are other types of forums that we're often familiar with. So if you read like a New York Times article or a whatever kind of online article with user comments at the bottom and people replying to the user comments, now oftentimes people get in fights in these forums. Hopefully we're not going to do that in our classes using Moodle forums, but who knows. Yelp and Amazon product reviews or other kinds of forums. A Moodle forum is an educational usage of the same kind of asynchronous communication conversation technology. Now, what I have found, the usage of a Moodle forum, so for the student, what a Moodle forum, the benefits that it can give a student is we can encourage them to engage in active reading. This is often something that we try to, we scratch our heads over. How do we get students to read at a deeper level? And I think there are ways we can use Moodle forums to do so. We can help students discern important parts of class readings. I know that I oftentimes forget how difficult academic readings are for our students, because it's such a native language for me, but for our students, they're just learning this native language. And so when we assign something, I find that my students oftentimes, they can't discern what the important parts of the readings are. They get caught up in the little details. They don't really understand how the details fit in with the big story, or they're reading really quickly and not at sort of the engaged level. So Moodle forums can be used to help students zero in on the important parts of the readings. And I'll show you some examples of that. Moodle forums can get students to think about an important topic before class, and that helps to prime the pump for class discussion. Now, I don't know what class discussion is going to look like moving forward. I'm going to have to think through that one a little bit, but I'll show you how this works in my classes. For the entire class, I've had great success with Moodle forums to help begin a class discussion before time, so students can be talking with each other about something that we're then going to talk about in class. Students can help each other think about a topic. This often happens. Someone will be thinking about a problem or an issue, and then someone else will reply to them, and then there'll be this conversation, a little mini conversation. And then also on the back end, after we've had a class, after we had a discussion, a Moodle forum can be used to extend that class conversation beyond class time. And this also happens in Moodle forums, and maybe I can show you an example of that. Now for the instructor, for me, Moodle forums have had good success in ensuring-ish that students do the readings. It's not completely a fail-safe method. I also get great information about what students are understanding and not understanding. This is probably one of the most useful things I find about Moodle forums. And then when I find out what they're understanding and not understanding, especially the not understanding, I can use class time to address those things, especially when there's commonalities in the things that they're not getting. Moodle forums, I can also see what topics and ideas from the readings students are finding to be interesting, and that can be the thing that we use to start class conversation. And all of this helps me get hit the ground running when it comes time to actually have a class. So before I show you some specific examples, and maybe I'll pause after this to field any questions if there are any. A quick caveat, Moodle forums are just a tool to support pedagogy. I don't think they're the silver bullet for all of the problems we have now that we have to go to remote learning. But they are a good tool. They can do certain things, but only if we work to design and use them with intention and care. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that, and I'll sort of show you some of that in my own examples from my classes. So let me see here. Let me get the chats open. So I'm looking at them. Thank you for loving the humor. So any questions right now? I'm about to show you some examples from my own Moodle courses, but is there anything I can respond to right now? If not, I will go right to some examples. Okay, so I'm going to show you examples from two courses. The one you're looking at right now is my religious extremism course, which I taught last fall. And the reason there are pictures of dogs is because this particular course subject matter is like super heavy and depressing. And so we instituted this practice in my class that students would email me pictures of their pets. And then every week someone's pet would be up, the first thing they saw when they opened the Moodle page. And so that made us all feel a little bit better about the state of humanity. Okay, so let me show you a Moodle forum from this class. And I'll show you, this is a week we talked about the Crusades and jihad. We read about that. And this discussion board, I call them discussion boards in my classes, and I was asked why do I call them discussion boards and not forums, and I have no good answer for that. I just call them discussion boards. So this is one example of a discussion board that I use in my classes. I only use this style of discussion board. I call this an open topic one. I only use this in classes where the readings I know are going to elicit very strong reactions and responses from the students. And in this particular course, religious extremism, almost all the readings I know are going to elicit strong reactions. And so I use a sort of an open kind of discussion board. And here are the instructions I give to the students. These are straight from my syllabus. I cut and paste those into my instructions in Moodle, at least for the first several times that they do these. So I know you can all read, but I'm gonna read parts of this with you so I can pause at certain parts and skip over certain things. So the subject matter of this course is particularly heavy. Violent people who've committed violent acts for reasons that are difficult to grasp. I expect that you will find yourself having strong visceral reactions at various points throughout the semester to some of what you read, see, and discuss. Moreover, because you'll be introduced to a variety of historical, theological, and geopolitical contexts that may be new to you, there may be times this semester when you feel a bit lost. The discussion board on Moodle is designed to be a place for you to put your thoughts and feelings into writing and to make them available to other class members to read and respond to. Each week you will be expected to post one extended contribution to the discussion board, which I call the original entry, and one response to someone else's contribution, your reply. I don't know why the original entries got cut off here, but original entries. These are your more substantial original weekly entries wherein you articulate your own ruminations about the readings and class discussions. I don't necessarily expect for original entries to consist of fully formed arguments. I expect rather for them to be exploratory in nature, that you'll be thinking through an issue as you write or ruminating on a response you've had to an idea or argument from the readings. Excuse me, my dog needs to be let out. Okay, I'm back. Original entries should be written clearly with proper grammar, syntax, and spelling, and so forth, and the points you're attempting to make should be clear, but I do not want you to think of these as formal academic papers. They're more like academic papers / journal entry hybrids. Specifically, they should be 600 words minimum per week. Number 3 here, your original entries must refer to specific arguments and ideas from the readings or films. To receive full credit, you should refer to at least 2 different points from the readings or films, and then I show them how to cite the readings. This is the important part for me for what I'm calling the open discussion boards, because I want them to read at a critical level. So here I'm defining what I think a critical engagement with the readings might be. It might be discussing what you see wrong with an idea or argument in the readings. It might be connecting an idea from the readings to something you learned in another class. It might be showing how a point is consistent or inconsistent with what you've learned thus far in this class. It might be teasing out the unstated implications of an argument or explaining the consistencies or inconsistencies within the reading itself. It might be relating an argument from the readings to personal experience, explaining whether or not the readings are illuminative. And I'll have to tell you that this last one here is the one that students most frequently go to in this more open style discussion boards. I find this is really, really useful. I'll show you some more targeted discussion board ones where I'm asking a specific question, and oftentimes I'm asking them to think through their own experiences, things that they've seen or experienced in the past with what we're reading about. Further things, this is what I'm telling them when they're submitted. For me, I have them do half an hour before class time, so I have time to look at them, at least glance at them really, really quickly so I know what topics are bubbling up. I spend a little bit more time on them after class when I'm grading them, and here I'm telling them how I grade them. It's basically a modified pass-fail. You get 8 points if you meet all of the above criteria. 6 points if you miss one of the things, like if it's too short or if you fail to cite the readings or quote the readings. The replies are much shorter. What it says here is they have to reply to one other person's original entry, and it has to be 200 words. For this particular week on the Crusades and Jihad, here was what their original entries look like. Now, Brian Blackwell went in and scrubbed their actual names, and he put in names of characters from The Office here, so we can don't have any FERPA issues going on. But here's one particular example of what a student wrote. I won't read the whole thing, but I will want to look at parts of it. So this student, she was taken with the readings discussion of the Franks, a group I knew nothing about until I actually did this reading myself. But they were a Crusader group. What she says, right about here, so the Franks killed more than 100,000 people during the Crusade, which is a high number. She quotes from Armstrong. She says, when I first read this, I thought to myself, no, certainly not. So I went back and read through it again. Armstrong openly describes cannibalism here, which is something I'd not previously connected to religious extremism. She quotes the Muslim reaction to the Francs. And she says, these things are so bizarre and so violent. There's so many things that I see wrong with these ideas, but it is also very consistent with many of the groups that Armstrong describes in this book. This is the part that I find really interesting. She says, after I read and processed this chapter, so this, she's not just reading on a cursory level, she's reading, rereading, and then reflecting back on it. She says, I attempted to connect some of these ideas with personal experience in hope that it would allow me to see the readings in a more illuminative way. When I read about the Francs and all the other groups similar to them, I found myself relating them to demons or evil people. I had to stop myself and remember that these are religious people committing these acts of violence. Similar to Muslim groups described in this chapter, I too completely failed to recognize the Francs' religious passion and assumed that they were driven simply that they were simply driven by material greed. I do this exact same thing with other religious-inspired terrorist attacks or religious extremist attacks that happen in today's world. So relating something from the Crusades to today's world, as soon as I hear about it, I immediately place it in the bad category in my mind and never even considered the devotion that they are resembling towards their faith. Now, why this is interesting is that the student here, Meredith Palmer, so-called student, she is drawn to this personal reflection, right? And similar to you, I am quick to define individuals as bad because their actions are so obviously bad in my mind. And she goes on to explain her own engagement with thinking through this. Now, I replied to this particular student, when I jump in, I don't always jump in on discussion boards, but sometimes what they're saying is so interesting that I find myself unable not to jump in. Oftentimes, I have a really specific point that I want to say. In this case, interesting point, it's like we have an unspoken line between atrocities that are acceptable and atrocities that are unacceptable, which is something that this particular student talked about. Another student responding to the same part about this personal reflection. She says, I want to understand why they do bad things like they do, especially in the name of religion. When I read about the things they do, I immediately just want to say they are bad and move on. It is when I truly think about what they're doing that I can even attempt to fathom why they would do the thing they do. She connects it to her own faith, on how devoted she is. She says, I would die for my faith, but would I kill? Obviously not, right? So it's just like this really thinking things through on a deeper level than what would otherwise happen had I not made them do this, right? This student replied also, but she made this she put it in as a reply, but it's actually her original entry, right? Sort of on the same theme. I jumped in again because the student said something that I thought needed clarification. And so I was clarifying a point that the student wrote. And then I replied to the big post, the original post that we looked at. And what I often do is I'll quote what they say, right? And then my reply is, I think this happens most frequently, at least in the US, with instances of Christian extremism. Most of us are completely unwilling to entertain the notion that people do horrific things as an expression of their Christian faith. So that's what an open discussion board looks like in this particular class. Maybe I'll pause right here if there are any questions at this point. Otherwise, I will go on to show you different kinds of forums. Okay, from Tim, how do you structure this? When in a week are these due? Do they have an expectation that you'll respond? How do you share the grade with them? Okay, great questions. In this class and in most classes where I use forums, I have a weekly, well, I'll call them discussion boards, that is due. So it's every week, and it's based on the readings and other materials that we've done since the last discussion board. So it covers 2 classes. I will say that 95% of the time when students write their discussion boards, it's going to be about the material they most recently read, not the stuff from 2 classes ago for a Tuesday, Thursday class. Do they have an expectation that you will respond? They do not have an expectation that I'll respond. I would say that most of the time I jump in on the discussion boards, but not to everybody's original entry or to all the replies. There are some weeks when we all have them when we're just like overwhelmed with things. And in those cases, I just read them to make sure that, read them really quickly to make sure they meet the minimum criteria, and then I give them a score. And I'll show you how I score them. I'll show you how to turn on the grading function when we walk through how to set up a discussion board. Yes, Colleen, I am going to show how they are set up. We'll get to that after I give you some examples. From Kent, does your jumping in silence or chain? Maybe Ken, can you unmute yourself and ask that question? Because I'm not quite understanding what you're saying.
Happens in department meetings all the time. What I mean is, so you mentioned that sometimes you can't help but respond. When you respond, do you silence the students so that they say, oh, I better not say anything else because he said this? Or does it guide
Gotcha.
or sort of shove the discussion in a different way so that people are essentially agreeing with what they think you want?
Yeah, I get your question. So no, well, let me, there's a couple layers to unpack. One is that the way I have this set up, students are only required to reply to one original entry. So it doesn't often happen that you get extended conversations around one discussion topic. Sometimes that happens because someone writes something that is either so interesting or so provocative or so controversial that a whole bunch of students will reply. Now, when I jump in the conversation, it's almost always after class. So they've already submitted them, they've already done their reply, so they've already had a conversation. And then I jump in and I might reply to someone, I might clarify something. I'll show you some other examples where I'm gesturing towards where class is going. So we're gonna read about this more. But the way I have it set up, now you could set it up where these conversations are due well before whatever class time is going to look like. You can require, you can have, I'll show you an example of this. You can set the discussion topic and have it set up where they can only reply. And you can say you have to reply, like you have to have like 4 replies, in which case you will be able to generate a conversation and you yourself can get in on the conversation. But you're right, you have to be careful not to shut it down. Like you're not trying to give the right answer. I only tend to so-called give the right answer when I see students misunderstanding something. I'll just try to clarify for them. When they're ruminating about something, I definitely do not want to shut down their ruminations. Maybe I want to give them something further to think about, further material for them to chew on. Okay, let's see.
Dan, would you like me to read these to you?
Sure, yeah, that works.
So Colleen Balance asks, are you going to show how they are set up?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yep.
Okay. Ron Robinson asks, do you do an intro session to this in class before they actually begin the board? If so, how long does it take for the students to get it?
They get it instantly because when they, I can show you, I gotta move everything around here. I can show you what they see. So we'll go to, I'm gonna move my chat windows. Okay. Okay, this is not, let me switch to student view. So when students see the discussion boards, they see my topic, my question, and then there's a button that says post or something like that, or add a new discussion or add a new topic. They click on that, and then they type in their whatever they're going to type in, and they submit it, and then it goes up. I've never had a student once in years and years and years of doing this tell me that they couldn't figure out how to do it.
All right. Do you think this will work for a class of 32 students?
I think you have to, in my advice part, we're going to talk about this a little bit, but you have to really figure out what the purpose of the discussion board is. If it's to have students get into extended conversations, I think it can work. Probably what you need to do is to split them up into groups. There is a way of creating groups and then having forums that you set up for each group. Now, it can be the same topic that there is. They can be replying to the same question. If it's an open forum, they can do an open forum. But with 30 whatever students, you probably, you want to have them be engaged in smaller conversations, not gigantic conversations. That's from GR. Okay.
Yeah. Are late coming students at a disadvantage? Do they ever complain that everything has already been said by other students?
I haven't heard that complaint out loud, because the way I have the way I have the open discussion board set up, it's actually one of the parts I did not read to you when I was going through the instructions. But what it says is, if you read what other people have posted and you discover that someone has already talked about something that you were intending to write about, then what I want you to do is to reply to that person, but to indicate that you are going to be replying in the form of your original entry. So I let them still give the extended conversation discussion of the thing they intended to write on, but I want them to put it as a response to someone else who's actually talked about the same thing. So that way, you know, I'm indicating to them that this is a possibility, right? You may actually want to write about something that someone's already written about, but I want them to read what other people have posted, like that. So, you know, they need to read through what other people have written, but then I still want them to feel like they can post something that's pretty similar to what someone else has already talked about. What they'll often do is, in their reply, their original entry reply, they will actually be responding to something that they actually read in the original entry.
And then one last, two more. Do we have access on the CIL site to the instructions you give to students for the discussion forums?
I'll post those. Yep, happy to.
In Blackboard, you can set the forum where students cannot see others post before submitting their own. Does that exist here?
Yeah, it does. It's called a question and answer forum. So when I show you how to set up a forum, there's actually 5 different kinds of forums. I will tell you that I just, in the past, I have always used the default setting, which is the one that you just saw. The default setting is where students can post their own topics, and, so it's like different threads. The question and answer style forum, you as the instructor post the question, and then when students access that question, they have to type in and post their reply before they see anyone else's replies. So, so say like you're the last person in class to actually respond to the question, you will not be able to see, you as a student will not be able to see what other students have written until you hit submit, and then everyone's will appear. Well, not instantly. There's a lag time. You can set the lag time, but I think it's like default is 5 minutes. I could be wrong about that. It gives you a chance to edit before it actually goes live. But once it goes live, then all of the everybody else's responses become visible to you.
All right, I think that's all the questions. I'm going to meet
Okay.
again.
Okay. All right. So let me show you. Let me show you a discussion board from the same class that is one that I made more targeted. Now I will tell you that this is most often the kind of discussion board that I do, one that specifically asks the question, because I want, because of this issue of students reading something that's complicated and not quite understanding what the big purpose, the big picture is, getting lost in the details and not being able to trace the trajectory of the argument. So with the more targeted ones, which again is the ones that I more frequently do, I am helping them to zone in on the things that are the most important. But still, I want them to be engaged. I want them to think through an issue. So here's a targeted one for the week we were doing readings about Christian extremism, the Christian Reconstruction movement. So up here, I'm just telling them that this is going to be a targeted one. It's not going to be the open form. And here's the question I had for them. Now that you've read the article on the Southern Baptist Convention's website about just war theory, and Juergensmeyer, that's our textbook, Juergensmeyer's discussion of how Christian Reconstructionists like Mike Bray and Paul Hill, these are 2 Christian extremists, how they appeal to just war theory, I want you to answer the following. Do you think the Reconstructionist usage of just war theory as validation for their violent activities, in particular their appeal to the actions of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in World War II, has any validity in whole or in part? Why or why not? it's a really provocative question. Just war theory is middle of the road Christian theology, but Christian Reconstructionists are violent Christian extremists who use this middle of the road theology. So, you know, it leads to some really good involved thinking and writing about this difficult question. And so this student says, in short, I do not think the actions of the Reconstructionists are justified by just war theory. Thesis statement right there, beautiful. and then the student goes through to give all the reasons why the student thinks that this is the case. But another one, I don't know who the student is because these are office characters. I think after reading these texts, unless we are pacifists, we must admit that to some level we all subscribe to a form of just war theory. Again, super provocative opening statement. Now, I have this set up as the same default discussion forum topic. I should have set this up as a question and answer, or maybe I could have set this up as a question and answer where I pose the question and students had to reply before they could see what other students had written. But I didn't set up that, I think because I didn't know about that setting until actually pretty recently, to tell you the truth. So that's an example of a very targeted one. I'll give you another example. Don't want that. Need to pull this down. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is from the class I'm currently teaching, my religion and pop culture class. Okay, so here's the very first discussion board. Now in this class, every single forum that I use is a targeted one where I'm pointing their attention to certain big issues in the readings. And almost always, because of the nature of this class, religion and pop culture, I'm asking them to reflect on their own experiences with what are being discussed in the readings. Here's I actually give them a choice in this particular one. They can select prompt A or prompt B. I have this set up as a standard one where is the default setting where as soon as you post your topic, anyone can see it. Prompt A, Now, that's our author, discusses the surge in interest in the 1990s in various supernatural entities or experiences, angels, miracles, near-death experiences, channeling UFOs, and others. And he also gives us a variety of explanations about why people suddenly started taking these things really seriously in that decade. Which of these supernatural entities and experiences do you believe to be real? Do any of Withnow's explanations for why these things became popular strike a chord with you? In other words, do you see yourself represented in Withnow's explanations? If yes, which explanations? If not, how else do you explain your belief in these things? And what I tell them, if you're feeling bashful about declaring your belief in what some might consider fringe supernatural things, take heart in the fact that I, Dan Mathewson, totally think that UFOs are real. Prompt B, on the second full paragraph. So here I'm like zeroing in on something really precise, but it's in my mind it's a little section of the chapter that is a distillation of a lot of the things that Withnow is discussing. So in the second full paragraph on page 132, Withnow shows us a bunch of ways that the 1990s fascination with angels fit with the spirit of the times. Years ago, when I read this particular paragraph for the first time, I couldn't help but think of a particular website of Jesus drawings that some grad school friends and I discovered one day. I have no idea why we stumbled on the website, and then I have a link. Here it is if you like to peruse it. Make sure to click on the different professions, particularly the juggler. And this, here, I'll show you. This is hilarious. So these are pictures of Jesus, like with a policeman, and the juggler, one of my favorites, the juggler, Jesus clapping along. I can't hear all of your laughter. It's like silent. I don't understand. Here's one that like the creeper Jesus. Okay, so where am I go? Let me go back. So in the margins of one of my copies of After Heaven, the book by Withnow, I scribbled the words Jesus drawings, because to me the depiction of Jesus in the website's drawings provided the perfect example of what Withnow discusses in this paragraph, even though Withnow is talking about angels, not Jesus. For prompt B, I want you to find some other specific product or image or item that you think functions for contemporary audiences the way Withnow suggests. In this paragraph, Withnow suggests in this paragraph that angels do. If you can, provide a link or upload an image so that we can all see the product you've identified. Then I want you to explain why you think the thing you selected fits with what now discusses. And again, I have it's the same thing that I showed you last time, except I dropped the word count to 500 words. Same thing about replies. This is actually my class. Brian couldn't scrub their names, but I'm not going to show you anything that is revealing. So after talking to a lot of people, we decided that I can show you certain things, including this awesome one from Sarah, where she talks about Jesus toast, which is fantastic. If you don't know what Jesus toast is, just Google it. She gives all the reasons why she thinks this fits with Now's discussion of angels, the popularity of angels in the 1990s. And I could not help but reply, Jesus toast is awesome. And that was the extent of my response. Another, I think, fantastic reply came from Jeremiah. And he talked about Tom Hanks, how he functions in his movies in the way that Now talks about how angels function in the 1990s. And it was just such a thought-provoking and thoughtful argument about why Tom Hanks himself sort of is like an angel from the 1990s. And a student replied to him, just thought that was a really great analysis. And I said the same thing. And actually, we used this one to start our conversation in class. Let me pause there, see if there are any questions. And maybe you can moderate for me, it'd be great.
All right, so one question. Do students get discouraged if their entries never receive replies?
I have no idea. I don't know. I would say that through the course of, I will at some point reply to everybody. In fact, there are some weeks, I can say this with 100% certainty, there are some weeks when the discussion board topics and entries are so fantastic across the board that I can't help, despite my best intentions where I'm like, I just want to read these and grade them. But I have to reply to them just to give a word of encouragement, word of praise, to either clarify something or to bring up something else that's interesting to think about that's along the same vein. So there are some weeks when I reply to every single one. That inevitably happens at least once a semester in every class that I've done this. But certainly not every week. I don't know that students get frustrated or not. I don't know how to answer that. Now, here's what I'm also thinking. I'm going to have to adjust the way I use these as when we go remote. Being able to use the forums to sort of prime the pump for class discussion, to sort of discern what are interesting topics, what areas of confusion are for when we meet in class. I don't know what meeting in class is going to look like. If I don't reply to anybody's discussion board entries, I know we're going to talk about them in class, right? But I don't know that that's going to happen as we go remote. So I think one of the things I'm going to have to do is to be much more active on the discussion boards, being more present, because I'm not going to be present because class is going to look different. Everything that I've been reading about and about remote learning is that being present for our students in the things that we set up is going to be especially important in this new remote environment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and a related question is, do you find that students improve their work because of a sort of peer pressure?
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. I should have said that at some point. Absolutely. These are public, and that raises the stakes. They can't submit. It is very unlikely they submit something that they just slap together at the last second. So that is a. I'm sometimes quite. I don't know if the right word is like shocked is too strong of a word, but it surprises me a little bit. How well composed some of these are. They're better composed than what my expectations are in many instances. Almost never do I get a discussion board entry that has like wrong capitalizations and grammatical errors all over the place and typo like that. Almost, I mean, I suppose it has happened, but I can't think of an example of when it happened.
Mm-hmm. Do students supply their own titles for these entries?
Yeah, so when it's set up in the default setting, which I'll show you, yeah, students get to choose the titles of their entries. If you set it up as a question and answer, then I think they're just replying to your. I don't know that they set a title for their replies. I don't think they do. I think they're just replying to your question. You can also set it up. It's sort of a hybrid between the Q&A one and the default one, where uh, you set the topic or the question, and students only have the option of replying, but they can see everyone else's replies before they reply if others have replied before them. That's called a, I can't remember what it's called, but it's sort of a hybrid of the Q&A format and the default one.
All right, I think we've hit all the questions.
Okay. Let me show you. Let me show you a different one that from the same class. This is just to give you some ideas about how you might use these in your own classes. So here's the one. I called it a faux discussion board. I'm going to change this. This was actually what we were supposed to do, I think, our first week of spring break. So it's not this week, but the week before. And then I had to push this back to after our actual spring break. But so I'm going to change this a little bit. But the way I have it set up, this is in a this discussion board leads to their next short writing assignment, which is right here. It's probably my favorite assignment that I've ever written. But so this is a targeted one, and we're going to be reading about music and the arguments from our authors that music functions in a way that religion does. It's a really interesting argument, and so I'll just read this and then I can tell you what I'm thinking with this one. So for class on Thursday, there's a chapter from Latterman. That's one of our textbooks, and a short essay by Christian Partridge that I attach I give them as a PDF on the Moodle page. I also hand it out in class. So Latterman argues at the start of this chapter, and let me pause and say here that Latterman, it's a difficult argument. He's not always as clear as I hope he could be. He's actually a friend of mine and he's one of my professors. Great guy. But he argues at the start of his chapter that music can be religious in every sense of the word, a meaningful alternative to traditional religion that generates moral perspectives, special communities, and life-altering transformations in tune with divine energies. And then he goes on to analyze rave culture, the blues, and hip-hop, and crunk along these lines. He also looks at Elvis and the Grateful Dead especially, and then argues that only certain artists have the kinds of sacred qualities as these do, like the Beatles, the Who, the Clash, Uncle Tupelo, and Nirvana. So for the first part of today's, I call it a faux discussion board. I can explain why I call it a faux discussion board. Here's my question. Which band or singer or rapper would you add to Latterman's list? If you want, you can give a reason or two for whichever artist you suggest, but you're not required to do so. Be prepared, however, to defend your artist in class. I'm going to change this to actually require them to give rationales for their arguments. And then in this way, they have to engage with the arguments that Latterman's been giving. Now, this is the second part here of this particular discussion board where this connects to the short writing assignment that's coming up. So the second reading from Christian Partridge is more conceptually dense than is a chapter from Latterman. It's actually a quite hard, sophisticated argument. But I like it very much for a few reasons. First, because it's really short, won't take you long to read. And second, because he's trying to get us to think intentionally about music as a dynamic medium in the construction of personal and social identities, or as something that is central to meaning making and moral life. His key analytic category is affective space. So make sure to read footnote number 1. So I'm pointing them to something that's actually really important, which comes up on page 183 when he first introduces us to the idea of affective space. The third reason I really like this short essay is because starting on page 186, he gives his own analysis of dub, a music genre I know next to nothing about, and how it creates the very affective space he's interested in. For the second part of today's faux discussion board entry, I want you to come up with a list of 3 to 5 songs that for you create the kind of affective space that Partridge discusses. To be clear, I'm not asking you to come up with songs that fit Partridge's analysis of dub. I'm asking you rather for you to take Partridge seriously when he claims that music communicates and shapes the self. I'd like for you to list 3 to 5 songs that you think communicate and shape yourself. I just want them to think through something intentionally. The next assignment, it's actually a major writing assignment. It might be a presentation. I'll have to think about how I'm going to do this. But they actually have to analyze a song that has this particular religious function that Partridge talks about, that creates their sense of their own selves, that creates an effective space the way Partridge describes. I did this assignment last time I taught this course, and it was by far and away the most powerful thing, because I had them perform their papers in class. Like they had to, I brought in a speaker, they had to play the song and then read the manuscript that they'd written about it. And it was an amazing class. It was one of the best classes I've ever had. So this is an example of a discussion board, which is used to set up a major writing assignment, that ties into, at the very core of what we're actually doing in this class. All right, I can pause here. I see that there's been some chats. Prince. Great example. So GR, these are great examples of how forms can be used. I want to make sure we have enough time to see how, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. 15 minutes, let's do it. Okay. Thank you, GR, for reining me in. Okay, so let's go to how they're set up. So here's the current class I'm teaching. So I'm going to assume you know how to add things to the different sections that you create in your courses. Okay. Oops, that's not what I want to do. I want to go down here, add an activity or resource. Okay. So we want to choose the form right here. You know, you can read about all this stuff. I don't generally find that helps me to know what these things do. Click on add. Okay. And okay, so you gave your forum a name. So this is our Zoom forum. Okay. If you type something in the description here, you have to click on this box here, and then it will show whatever you type here on your main Moodle page. I never do that because it just clutters up my main Moodle page. Now here's the different forum types that I was telling you about. This is the one that every example I've given you has been the standard forum for general use. You know, you post a topic, students can create their own discussion board threads, and then students can reply within those threads. The other ones, the Q&A forum is the one that I told you about, where you post a question, and then students have to reply to the question before they can see what other students have written. A single simple discussion is the hybrid one that I told you about, where you post the topic, but students can only reply. They can't create their own topics. But they can also see what how other people have replied before they post theirs if they want to. Each person posts one discussion. I'm not too sure how that's different than the standard one. And then the standard form displayed in a blog-like format, it just changes how it actually appears. I've never found a use for that. You know, the standard one is the one that I've you know, it does everything I need it to. Now that I know more, I can use the Q&A, and I can use a single simple discussion. These other sections here, let's get to how to grade them. So here's something that's kind of confusing. There's two sections in here, the grading and the ratings. This grade section here, this is a new feature from, I think, the latest update to Moodle. I can't figure out what this is. I've done some Googling on it. I don't know what it is. The way that you grade a forum, a discussion board entry, is in the ratings section. So, so when you click on that, what I do for my simple one, you know, where I'm giving them points, I can either choose the average of ratings or the sum of ratings. It makes no difference because I'm the only one who's rating it. If you had multiple, like if you had a TA, or if there are multiple instructors who are each going to assign a different grade to specific entries, then this would average those two out. But since I'm the only one grading it, I choose the average of rating or the sum of ratings. It doesn't really matter. And then you got to choose. So I do a point. I don't know what the scale thing means. I get confused in all default competent. You can choose pass fail, I guess. But I choose the point system. And as soon as you click on that, then you can decide how many points you want to give to a single entry, 10 points or whatever. Now, if you just did that, if you saved and returned a course, yours would be set up. Actually, you have to, here's where you type in the instructions. I screwed that up, right? So you type the instructions, the topic, the topic, the question you want to ask, whatever. My super long instructions all go in here, right? When you click on that, it appears on the front page. That's why I never click on it. So if you have that set up and you hit save and return to course, save and return to course. Okay, so we have our Zoom form all set up exactly the same way I just showed you for all of the ones that I have. Okay, so students, when they open it, they see the instruction, the topic, the questions, then they add a new discussion topic. And when they click on that, yeah, this is, I think Dino, you asked, this is where you type in your topic and then you type in whatever it is you're gonna say. You can attach files and then you post the form and then it'll go to the forum. Let me show you, you can type questions now, or I can show you some other of the other categories in here. So we can edit settings, so I can show you other things. Okay, so as you just saw, students can attach files or images. You have the capacity to decide how big and how small. You can limit the number of attachments. Subscription and tracking. So I just use this as at the default, but you can, what this is you can force students to subscribe to the forum. What that means is that when someone posts a reply to one of their topics, they'll get an email that says, so-and-so replied to your topic. And I actually think in the email, it has the text of what that reply is. So the problem is that if you have like 10 replies, then of course you get a gajillion emails and people just don't pay attention to them. You can set it up for optional so students can decide if they want to subscribe or not. Discussion locking, this is the section where if you want to shut a forum down after like a week, so say there's a forum going and no one posts on it for a week, then it'll be locked. No one can post on it after that. I don't mess around with that. This is something I'm going to think about though. If a lot of our teaching moves to this sort of asynchronous conversations that happen in forums, and if we have, and if we do find that we have robust conversations, but I can envision that happening, you can set a threshold limit for how many times students can reply to a discussion board. Like you know how when you're having class discussion, you have like the two students who like stick their hand up for every time someone says something and they're like dominating class conversation. Well, this is a way of limiting people from dominating a discussion board or a forum. Is you can say within the scope of 3 days, you are allowed to have 8 times posting something on the discussion board, and then I'm going to give you a warning when you've used 6 of your posts, telling you that you have 2 more to go, and then you're going to be locked out. So that's something you can do. Okay, a couple questions. GR, do you recommend that students copy and paste their entries? Yeah, I do. I don't tell them this. I think they sort of do this naturally. But now that you're saying this, I probably should tell them this, put this in the instructions. This is from my own experience using Moodle. I'll be like working on something in Moodle, some super long instructions, and then my computer will crash and I'll get really pissed off. So, doing it in Word and then saving as you go and then cutting and pasting, I think is, for longer things, I think is a recommended way of doing it. You put dates in the forum to start and stop it. I put, let's see, what do I do? I don't, you can restrict their access. Like if you want to do a date restriction, is there, I don't know. Like I just do the default and like it's due, they know it's due by 9 o'clock. And like, or whenever I have it due, and then if it's, you can see when it's been posted and then if it's late or not. Is there a way of it telling you that it's activity completion? Yeah, I'm not, it's not like an assignment in Moodle where you put the assignment due date. You can set that in the actual, in this section, and then when you look at it, you can see who submitted something late or early. I can check into that, Colleen, for you if I can, maybe. Um, did I miss anything, Ian?
So Charlotte has said, I used auto subscription, which initially sends emails to each student when someone posts, but the students can unsubscribe. I felt that students were more likely to remember to post if they saw an email about someone else posting. Um, sorry, Young Feng noted the grade is maybe useful if you set up and use gradebook in Moodle, then you can
Yeah.
connect the discussion forum grade to a specific grade in a grade category in the gradebook for the course.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, if you have it set up in a grade book, the grade will automatically go into the grade book. One thing along those lines, I should have mentioned this. Read tracking. If this is turned on, then students, when they look at a discussion board, they will see the post that they have not read yet. Like they'll be highlighted, and also I think the post that they haven't read will show up on like their Moodle course homepage, like in the side area. You know what I'm talking about? Like it'll show like here are the things that you haven't read yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little less intrusive than getting an email every time that someone replies to yours. But it's more than, it's at least some indication that you have stuff to read.
Yeah. Begonia says, I use Wiki in Moodle, similar to the forum, and it is important to copy and paste because two people cannot have it opened at the same time. I don't know if forum works in the same way as Wiki.
Two people can definitely have a forum open at the same time in a forum, for sure. They can all be working at the same time.
All right. And Dave says, I would like to have students add PowerPoints to my forum. How do they do that?
I would assume that it's in the attachment area. So we'll go back to save and display. This is a student who's going to add a discussion topic, right? They can put an attachment in here. Depends how big the attachment is, but you could certainly drag a PowerPoint in there. I think if it's less than 500 kilobytes. I don't know, is that big or small for PowerPoint? Not entirely sure. Let me jump to my PowerPoint real quick. Okay. Here's some. I see we just have a few minutes left. Here's my best advice for the use of forums. So the first is to figure out the purpose of your forum. Like why are you setting it up? And it's not just because we're going remote and we have to do something. But you know, is it just to ensure that students are doing the readings, which I think is a perfectly valid use of the forum? Then that's how you need to set it up, and that's how you need to think of it. Is it because you want to gauge a level of comprehension? Is it because you want to target their reading? Is it because you have a specific topic you want them to think through individually or collectively? Is it because you had some sort of class discussion, whatever that looks like in our new environment, that you want to continue after the fact? So however you're going to, whatever it is that you want to get out of the forum, you have to decide that before you set it up. And then you need to be careful about setting up the parameters of the assignment. Do it, you know, my sort of default is describing things as fully as possible so students know what they're doing. You know, how many posts are you expecting them? How many words should those put? They don't have to be super long. Mine, the way I typically use them, are pretty long, but they don't have to be. They can be quick. How many words, how many replies are we going to require? What are the specific topics you want them to write about, if there are any? Do you have expectations about citations? How many citations? What style do you want them to use? Is this a completion grade? Is it pass-fail? Is it a regular grade? You can set it up that way. Is it ungraded? And then if it is a graded thing, even if it's like a partially or a sort of a modified pass-fail, like what are your criteria for the grades? And then the last piece we already talked about is we need to be present in our forums that we create, especially in the remote environment that we're going to. What's going on here? So here's some further help. When I don't know something, this applies to all Moodle, right? My first thing that I do is GTS, Google that shit, right? Moodle. So I type in Google Moodle forum. How do I limit the number of student posts? And like inevitably, there'll be a whole bunch of hits. What is a threaded discussion? If I don't know something, I just Google it. This link here, I'll actually put this link right into the CIL Moodle page. This, I think, is the best thing that I found that describes the full functionality of Moodle forums. As far as I'm concerned, it's way better than the Moodle Basics or Advanced Users of Moodle courses that are currently available on your Moodle dashboard. Those you have to dig through to find the good information. And then for all technical things, Brian Blackwell is the technical side. He's super responsive. He's the guy that I go to when I have questions about anything related to Moodle. All right, that's all I got. Are we out of time?
We're at 2:00. Do we want to, if there's if anybody has a quick question you want to post in the chat right now, we can probably go over for an extra minute or so, but thank you, Dan. That was really great and very clear.
Awesome, thanks, you're welcome.
All right, yay.
All right, good seeing everyone.
Yes. Thank you all.
All right, good luck in your preparations for your courses.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.